Welcome to the Connected Campus Podcast, where we explore the ways that diverse professionals are working every day to optimize their efforts to recruit, retain, and graduate their students.
Hey everybody, Dustin here with a quick intro for this special crossover episode of the Connected Campus Podcast. This is a cross post of an episode of my other podcast, the Higher Ed Geek, with Gordon Boys from Concept3D. So just wanted to share the great work of one of our close partners here at Pathify. So please do enjoy this episode from the Higher Ed Geek Podcast with Gordon. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, a bonus episode number 173 with Gordon Boys from Concept3D. So great conversation about how institutions can best have digital presence and kind of virtual wayfinding so that students can take virtual tours and really plan out how they're sort of navigating the physical spaces of campus and making informed decisions about where they're going to attend college. So I think it was a really great conversation, cool thing to explore as we continue to kind of dig in over the past couple of seasons of, you know, the different platforms and tools and ways that students are working to make informed choices about their higher ed options. So definitely connect with Gordon. Check out all the stuff that he mentioned in the show notes as usual. And without further ado, this is episode number 173, a bonus episode with Gordon Boys. For our episode today, I am super excited to be talking about something that's a bit new to me, and it's always a good time when I get to learn along with our listeners, but you know, around kind of virtual reality, wayfinding, maps, and all that kind of good stuff, how we're supporting students to better understand, you know, their institutions that they're choosing to go to, the resources that are available, and supporting them while they're there as well to kind of you know, be able to get better connected to all the different things that various institutions have to offer to them. So we will get to it, though, as we always do, start out with introductions and have our guests introduce themselves and give a brief overview of their professional background and how they got to be where they are today.
Since it's a higher ed podcast, I'll mention where I got started. I went to Virginia Tech undergrad. I've always been in and around technology. I was a computer science major as an undergrad and spent a long time on the software side of telecom, working for some small companies and some big companies, and then found myself more on the startup, early stage software world for about the last 10 years. Spent 6 years as CEO of Concept3D and live in Colorado. Proud to have a team in Colorado, a lot of folks on the East Coast, and a Minnesota office as well. Always been at the intersection of business and technology.
You know, you have that technology background. Like, what was it maybe that interested you about Concept3D and kind of getting into, you know, what is a fairly unique world of education and higher education in particular?
Yeah, I think it was the interactions between our people and our customers. You know, I had an opportunity to work with an investor and see a lot of different companies. And long story short, when I got involved in Concept3D, there was just some magic there between our clients and our tech and our people. And I sort of fell in love with that and then the potential to enhance the business model. When I joined the company, we were largely in the pro service business with just the beginnings of a promising SaaS platform. And so it was also an opportunity to transition something that in some ways was pretty obvious, but there's a lot of hard work to transition from a professional services based business to a software business. We had great raw ingredients and just sort of fell in love with that combination of things. Also have found that working with higher ed clients they're just a great customer base. They certainly push you. They're understanding, limitless feedback, as you probably know, working with the university community. So all of those were the right ingredients for me to raise my hand and say, you know, I went from this sort of interim CEO doing some restructuring work at the company to saying, I really want to be a part of this for the long run.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome that you've stuck around, because I think, yeah, it could have just been like, oh, you know, well, it was a place where like my skills could be useful. Then it's just like, all right, cool, like good luck, you know, just like leave it. But like, yeah, it's super unique, and I think it can be obviously super fulfilling and rewarding for the folks that work in it. And you know, obviously, so many people have kind of just stuck around for a long time. And like, I mean, for me, I've only worked in education, and I can't really imagine working anywhere else. Um, but before we get too far, though, just so folks kind of have an understanding, I know I tried to give kind of my brief sort of synopsis of what Concept3D does, but if you want to give, yeah, kind of a brief summary of Concept3D and yeah, what you do.
Yeah, our business is to partner with universities to take all the things that they already do, the campus that they already run and operate, and create a better, stronger digital representation of that for prospective students, for their families that are making that decision on a college together, and then to enhance student life once that student is on campus. We do that through three different offerings that are all part of one platform. We do maps, virtual tours, and an events platform for higher ed, and it's really focused around that sort of sense of community and, like I said, taking those things that already exist and just making them a stronger, better digital experience for the students and prospective students.
Yeah, and I mean, and anymore, I'm sure just like the need and importance has cemented over the past couple of years with the pandemic, where there had to be kind of a you know entire reliance on kind of the digital manifestation of institutions across the board. You know, with how they taught classes and how they just kind of conducted business, and then certainly a good portion of what you all do kind of on the front end with recruiting students, but and I guess just generally, like, you know, I always think about these tools kind of augmenting the work of on campus professionals versus like seeking to replace it. And if it is, it's replacing the sort of like, tedious parts of the work and allowing professionals to do what they're, trained to do and, educated to do and everything. So, how do you see the work that you and your team does augmenting the on campus work?
Yeah, I think augmenting is a great word. Complementing is a great word, and just creating the best digital presence for things that already happened. So, best example might be a map, right? And a lot of the places that we go to, college and university in the U.S., are the physical elements of the campus are a big part of that experience, and being able to represent that to someone when they're not able to come to the campus is really important, right? So how do you make them feel what that biology lab is going to look like, or the community that gets created in the cafeteria or at athletic events? That's really what we do, right, with our campus map. Swear that I like the idea of augmenting. Those things are going to happen anyway. Those facilities exist anyway. But how do you put them in the best light so that that prospective student can get that feeling, that sense of being part of that community um, for 4 years that are in their future? I think the other real important part of that on the mapping side and the virtual tour side is you make it more accessible, right? Some folks are able to, because of their socioeconomic status, they're allowed to they have the opportunity to visit a lot of different campuses,
Mhm.
and they get that feel for campus and they get it in person. They probably got it online first, but they end up really feeling that campus in person. But with our technology and partnering with our university customers, we're able to make it accessible to people who can't travel, right? How do they get the feel for that university that they may be interested in? Maybe even the university is interested in them and offering them a scholarship, but it's just not affordable to be able to travel. That's where those virtual experiences really complement all of the things that they can read about and see online and research online, but they can get a real feel for being there while being remote.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a huge part of it is, recruiting diverse students and having someone feel really engaged and sort of reassured and excited because they have that sense of place because like yeah they just wouldn't have been able to come otherwise, even if they're like semi local. But then certainly yeah, if you're recruiting kind of nationally or internationally and you're just getting all those different people able to really better understand what it's going to be like and um you know uh, I think, yeah, it's just really powerful. And it almost has like an inverse thing. I just thought of this question because, like, I think the sense of place is so important. And I've worked a lot with students who are studying in entirely online programs, but they still more often than not like chose the institution for a reason. Like certainly a good portion of it may be just kind of like the price or the convenience or whatever of the program that they want. But like if you can kind of nurture that affinity still for the institution and sense of place and all that kind of stuff, like, obviously they could still come to campus, they might want to come to the bookstore and get some swag or something, like, and those sort of things. So like, have you had any experience with that sort of thing of like still trying to like offer it to fully online students or maybe like, uh, populations like that where like they might be kind of just like written off from one perspective, but do you see kind of like a use case for something like that?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I hadn't really thought about it, but it did certainly percolate a thought. I have a college freshman, and he was considering. He had a non-college sport that that was a big part of his life in junior high and high school, and he was looking at those hybrid environments where they had a really strong online offering. But if the combination of timing and schedule and academics was able to line up, they're like, you can come on campus anytime you want and be part of our on-campus program. And so we're completely fluid between the two different offerings. So, not necessarily specific to what our business, but I think what you suggest there is increasingly important to students. It's relevant, and I think as higher ed evolves, there's a high likelihood that that ends up being increasingly relevant to students in the future. And I think it's attractive based on my limited experience watching my son end up making his decisions. The other place that's probably relevant to your question that we've seen, right, is during the pandemic, which we talked about briefly a few minutes ago. You saw the strong need for events that were hybrid, right? And so we recently acquired Localist, and we love the whole world of events and using events to create a sense of community and sort of bolster the online presence of a university. And you get that with hybrid events, right? So there's no reason why an event can't be both an in-person event and streamed event. And that gets, I think, exactly at what you're talking about. It can be in a place, but it place may or may not mean in person to some of those people that are participating and absorbing that content.
Yeah, and that was just like kind of a personal curiosity. Like I think it would probably, yeah, it would never be kind of like the full focus necessarily, but like yeah, there's just I think going to be because as with many things, we've kind of got a glimpse of like what's possible, just in terms of like the scale or the quality or sort of the agility that we could like do things, in digital environments and just people being uh, who maybe were skeptical or at least just like have aware and just accepting and being like, oh, okay, this I could see how this works, and then just sort of like, as like kind of like the work like you're doing, I think just continues to permeate. People will be like, oh, well, could we just like use this over here too? Like it wouldn't be like, oh, we're only using this for our online students just to kind of get a little tease and glimpse of what our campus is like, even though they may never come. Because it's like I think that there will still be kind of like a small sliver of people that would like want to come to a campus that are studying fully online, because I think people who choose that are certainly, wanting to, be where they are and not have to disrupt their lives. But I think for the people that desire those things, yeah, like having a very strong, like fully digital hybrid or, any of those sort of things will just be like so impactful for them. So just like
Yeah.
having that be kind of a consideration. Um, but I think it kind of builds to like my next question that I want to ask is just sort of like kind of capturing the extent of, as you've seen it obviously like probably a good variety of like institution types and the type of events and things that they're doing and everything. But like, moving forward, like what do you think are the kind of virtual experiences that campuses need to be planning for, and I guess like, primarily prospective students, but certainly you could kind of just run the gamut of the things that you feel like need to be a part of kind of the strategy in terms of like virtual experiences that these campuses are putting on.
Yeah, I mean, so enrollment is super important to universities these days. We're seeing a dip in the number of sort of available students, and so that requires that the colleges and universities have to put their best foot forward to attract those students. And so, but I actually think it was best, the idea of a virtual presence was best explained to me by a CMO in a corporate setting, and what this CMO said to me was, we need to think about the virtual experiences this way. If I only show a prospective client kind of written content, if you will, kind of walk them through a proposal. Maybe I use PowerPoint because I'm in the corporate setting, and I look at that in my sort of funnel. I might be able to say that there's a 10% likelihood that I'm going to win that business. And when I look at someone who actually takes the time to come out to my facility and tour my facility, I have a 50 or 70% chance of winning that business. And what the virtual experiences do is they bridge that pretty big gap, right? And so if you can get someone who's interested in what you have to offer to experience your offering in a virtual way, you go from that 10% to somewhere in the middle of, say, 50 or 70%. So you maybe get to like 25 or 35% likelihood, right? Because you increase engagement, you give them a sense for the community, a feel for what the experience is like in person, and you just take them along the buyer's journey, if you will, using a little bit of corporate speak. And I think that that's how, especially as you know, attracting students becomes increasingly important. I think that's how colleges and universities need to think about it. It's a stepping stone along that journey to that magic moment where a student commits to attending an institution. And we think that all three of the elements of our solution help with that engagement and help create that sense of community, that sense of I fit here, the sense of I can excel here, that I know, right? It's been interesting going through having a high school senior last year and a college freshman this year, really reflecting on how you make those decisions. And I think that just those virtual stepping stones take you along the way to that culmination where you say, "Yep, this is right for me. This is the perfect fit."
Well, and I think like because I've talked to a lot of people over the past like couple seasons and stuff about just like helping students to make informed choices about higher ed, because like there's so much kind of like anecdotal stuff, or like people are just like, I have to go here because that's just the way it is. And there's like nothing about like, oh well, like the program I want is really strong here compared to other places, or like they have great support resources or this or that or whatever. And I think having just a strong digital presence anymore, like that's where people are going to find those things where they can be kind of the stepping stones, where it's just like, oh well, wow, I didn't even know that they offered this or that, or that like this sort of would be what the community looks like, or like what the campus looks like, or those sort of things. Like you're just sort of starting to erode any sort of confusion or reticence, or just even unaware people being kind of unaware of what an institution has to offer and everything. And certainly it also very applicable to first generation students to be, made more comfortable about kind of being reassured of all the supports that are in place. And this is how you're going to navigate getting from, your residence hall to class to, the dining hall and different things like that. Because again, like even if they're like local, it could just be like, well, I work full time, or and like I don't have like reliable transportation or something, and then just like they can get that full level of support. That's somebody who could like, oh yeah, I took like 4 tours in person because I wanted to like see all the things and like go in the buildings or do whatever. But
Yeah.
so I think there's just so much like benefit. Just I think moving forward, we're like like you said, sort of the nature of kind of like what enrollment I think is going to look like over like the next decade. You need to be kind of really putting that best face forward and not kind of resting on your laurels.
Yeah, I'll give you a good example of that, right? And sometimes it's just the simple things. I was getting a tour of a university. Their head of web technology was kind of walking me around and talking about all the important elements of how this particular university functioned. And he mentioned parking. And he said, you think about parking as, it's just a very tactical thing and it's cost related. But it turns out when you're supporting that student, it's kind of like what you were describing there, a student that is working and maybe they're living off campus, maybe they're living at home, but one thing that's really important to them, right, is being able to park and then quickly get to their car so they can get to their job. And he said, we find that for that student, they really want to understand because they were in an urban setting. Where can they park? How far is it from their classes? How long is it going to take them to walk back to their car so that they can get to their job? And I hadn't really thought about that, but it's something that's super tactical that ends up for a certain demographic of students just being really, really, really important to understand, and understanding that and sharing that to someone who's not visiting in person is even harder. And those are the little things that we try and help with, and the little things that are important in the decision making process for a high school senior.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it all matters because I use, I speak in metaphors quite often, but just like, that idea of like, kind of like the nagging pebble in your shoe that you just can't get out. If it is like either, you know, it's a point of ambiguity of like, I don't know if I can make this work with like, yeah, like schedules and getting around and doing this or that, or the other thing, or like, um, if you're like doing it or maybe doing it not in the best way, then it's just like this nagging thing. And that can just grow to be enough of like kind of a grievance, like where like I chose to enroll here because like, oh yeah, my friends are here, or this, that, the other thing, but just like, this isn't gonna work. Like I can't make this work. And if you do kind of like, because I think it just can be so much part of like, certainly like the recruitment before a student like pays a deposit and all that. But then if they're like, okay, I am studying here, this is what my life looks like, these are where my classes are, like, let's do some wayfinding. How am I going to get from, point A to point B and all that? And having folks from campus maybe helping with that. Cause and that, I don't want to get in my soapbox about too many things, but like, there's so much about like higher ed that, again, it's kind of anecdotal. So like, even when you're there, about like, oh, register for these classes or like do these things. And it's like students will kind of just like figure it out on their own. But if they had just like stopped and asked a staff member about like, their class schedule or like, getting around or something, they would be much better off. So just like, the orientation process, preparing and all that, like, yeah, there's just so much here. I think and I'm just love kind of what we're riffing on here in this kind of jam session of like, just these resources for students to be, better supported and prepared and engaged, with kind of the digital face for institutions. But, it's something that's a little bit foreign to me. I think obviously like we've talked a lot about, you know, virtual tours or just sort of campus visits in general, like, whether they're happening in person or online, like with that, I think as sort of like, I think kind of a crucial piece here, like a goal to kind of aim for, like what else I guess is sort of resonating with you of like what makes that like so important and so crucial to kind of aim for, because I'm sure like maybe some of the things that you do maybe kind of nudge, especially prospective students towards like wanting to kind of get a little bit more up close and personal with the institution. So what have you seen as kind of like, why that's so valuable?
I'll start with, we try and help bridge that gap, right? So, as an example, we have some of our clients that right inside their virtual tour, you get to sign up for an in-person tour. That's the obvious next step as you're progressing in that commitment to saying, hey, this is the right place for me. I think the reason that both of those are so important, if you've ever talked to a prospective student about their tours, you'll realize that 8 or 9 times out of 10, they're super binary. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I can tell you that they end up, that 18 or 19-year-old, right, most times ends up leaving that college campus going, yeah, I can see myself there, or nah, it just wasn't right. And it's just a feeling. It's probably a combination of things that go into that feeling, right? Some of them are probably really rational. Some of them might happen to be, was it raining that day, or some things that probably shouldn't influence us that much. But there's just something magical that happens about being on a tour and being there. You get to sort of say, yeah, this is where I fit in. This feels like the right place for me. You're making that decision between sort of how urban versus how rural do you want the campus to be? How big versus how small? Sort of how outgoing versus how sort of business oriented is the student body. And you're just getting this feel for class size is another one if you happen to get to peek into a class or join a class. Just depending on your background, you're trying to figure out that fit for you. And I find from talking to the high school seniors that I talk to that sometimes they're looking, it's not predictable based on where they've been. Sometimes they're looking for something that's totally different than what they've already experienced on some of those axes, if you will. And sometimes they're looking for something that's pretty similar because they want to feel comfortable. They feel like, hey, the more comfortable I am with where I'm going, the more similar it is to what I've done before, the better I'll be set up for success. I don't want too much volatility introduced to my education. But all that comes back to there's just something that happens when somebody has a visit that gets them to say, yeah, this is right for me, or no, probably not so much. I've seen it with my own son. I've seen it with lots of the high school seniors that I've talked to over the years, that's just what ends up happening. We try and help our clients put their best foot forward when they're doing it virtually. And then obviously once they're on campus, basically leave it to them with the occasional sort of assist from the map, if you will. And the way we get an assist from the map is sometimes we prospective students and their families will do a sort of self-guided tour through the university with the help from our mapping application.
And I just really like just the idea of like you said, just really getting towards like what it is that somebody's looking for. Because I think sometimes when they see something and be like, oh, well, this is too big, or oh, this is too small, and all that, like they might not have been able to articulate that beforehand, but now as they get sort of like, actually looking at institutions and how, the campuses or just like the general environment and stuff, they can start to, I think, maybe articulate that better. And on the institution side, like you said, like they can really feature themselves in such a more kind of vibrant way. And I'm sure maybe start to realize like, well, how could we, exemplify our like kind of unique strengths and everything to really kind of make it clear. Because I think at a certain point, I'm sure if you toured a bunch of campuses like rapid fire one after another, they'd start to kind of blur together. You'd want to be able to lean on those differentiators, which I think is just going to be really important moving forward for institutions as well. But yeah, so it's just great to hear. I think just the work that you and your team are doing just to help kind of bridge these gaps for students all across the country. So it's
I mean,
just really important.
think about some of the intimidation there, right? Imagine making one of the, I don't know, 3 or 4 largest financial decisions in your life as a 17-year-old. I mean, it's pretty hard, right? They're not used to doing the due diligence, if you will, on such a big decision. Where are they going to live for the next 4 years? Who are they going to be around for the next 4 years? What are they going to learn for the next 4 years? And oh, by the way, that's a substantial financial commitment for most, if not all, sort of families these days.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you are just kind of immersed in this work, or we always like to give kind of the opportunity for anything that's been grabbing your attention, resource wise, if it is books or other podcasts or articles or things like that, stuff for folks to check out that we can put in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll give you a few that come to mind. Most of mine are about building the team, right? It's about how do I build the best set of people at Concept3D. And so one is I love the book and the framework, The Loyalist Team. It's a book by 4 different authors. Linda Adams is the first author, and she and her co-authors talk about trust and authenticity and a framework for that within a company, and sort of how to assess yourself as to where you're at. And so I think for me, it's just really important as a leader to make sure that as a team, we have the right framework for evaluating how we interact with each other. So that's my go-to there. The next is a book by Gary John Bishop. It's On F Yourself. And if you haven't read that, it's a great book. I think, especially, I love it personally, but I found it's been especially good for people that are early in career, um, because it's really about all the head trash that we can create for ourselves, especially with a little bit of a corporate backdrop. He does both sort of a personal discussion and then kind of a corporate discussion on a lot of these things that we end up creating as our own sort of monologue and our own truth. And he just talks about how to spot that and how to be your best self when these things are going through your head. And the third thing that comes to mind, just because it's at the perfect intersection for me of human performance and extreme sports, is the work of Stephen Kotler. Rise of Superman is my favorite of his books, but it's all about brain science and flow state and human performance. And for me, it's just a great framework to use to think about, during the workday, when are we at our best, and sort of recognizing those patterns and trying to give ourselves in our day to day the most opportunity to be in the flow state the longest. And for your podcast listeners who aren't familiar with the concept, just flow state is the sort of peak of human performance, and you can't be in it for 24/7. But how do you put yourself in it for the longest possible period of time so you have the highest performance? Those
Huh.
are those are the three books over the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years that I find myself most referring people to on my team, or sort of most identifying with. The probably the only three books in the last few years that I've read more than once.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I mean, it's always intriguing. Yeah, kind of geeking out on those sort of like productivity things, because I think like there is kind of like just a natural alignment when you like read, or I guess I'll say like when I read those things where it's just like, oh yeah, I do prefer to start my day with this, or like end my day with that, or whatever, just sort of like following uh your own sort of like internal cues, and doing stuff like that, and just getting kind of deep into those sort of different habits and stuff. But great, well, yeah, we'll link out to those resources in the show notes. But we will end as we always do. I think you've already shared so many incredible thoughts and things, but if you wanted to give us a final thought or a call to action to end the episode with, the floor is yours.
Being part of the higher ed community for the last 6 years, watching a lot of kids make that transition from high school to college, and then sort of thinking about the value proposition of higher ed in the U.S. People have said it before, but it's more true and more present for me than ever. And that's that it is, for a lot of people, the absolute best investment that you can make. It positions people for that transition from adolescence to adulthood, from student to employee, and it's just really, really important. I think that everybody who's involved in that system, or supporting folks like you and I, it's just to think about how we can continue to invest, evolve, and keep higher ed in the U.S. accessible, keep it the best in the world. Right? We have tons of students who come from all around the world to go to school in the U.S. There's a reason for that. Not that students don't go the other direction, but I think we just have the absolute best kind of 4 year college experience in the world, and we just need to continue to innovate and evolve that. And I'm just happy to be a part of that whole ecosystem as CEO of Concept3D. But I think about that more than ever over the last probably 3 years or so.
A lot has changed over the last couple of years. I think it has a lot of folks kind of reevaluating many things in life, but certainly appreciate kind of the constant of, yeah, I mean, education just being such a great catalyst for personal change and kind of benefits for society and everything, and how, yeah, I mean, just I mean, I've been working on the outskirts here for several years, and I know all the folks we have on the show have as well and stuff, and just like, like you said, kind of trying to bring the best of kind of modern technology to help support institutional missions and support students and all that good stuff. It's really good inspiration to get out of bed in the morning. But yeah, I just appreciate you hanging out, Gordon, sharing all that you did. We'll have ways to connect with you and Concept3D and everything that you shared in the show notes as usual. But yeah, it was a great conversation. Really enjoyed kind of jamming out on this. And just appreciate you and the great work that you and your team are doing.
Thanks, Dustin. Really appreciate your podcast and your commitment to the space over the years. Happy to be a part.
Thanks for listening to the Connected Campus. Please leave a 5-star review for the show and share it so others can discover us. Make sure to also subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Connected Campus.